All right, welcome to Ben's Book Summaries, and today we're really going to dive deep into Empire of Pain, the secret history of the Sackler dynasty.
Oh, absolutely.
This book, I mean, it is dense, it's impactful, and it really goes way beyond just pills.
It really does.
Are you ready to kind of explore this with me?
I am so ready. Let's do it.
Okay, perfect. So I think for starters, I mean, Patrick Radden Keefe, he does a phenomenal job just really unraveling this story of the Sackler family.
He does.
Like their rise to power, how they impacted the pharmaceutical industry, their connection to the opioid crisis.
It's not just like a straightforward history. He's really good at that storytelling.
Oh, for sure. And that's what makes it such a compelling read.
Yes.
So we're really talking about the family behind Purdue Pharma, the makers of OxyContin.
Right.
And this isn't just a history lesson, right?
No, not at all. He gives us this front row seat to like all the strategies.
Yeah.
They used to build this pharmaceutical empire and how those strategies really fueled, what we know as a major public health crisis.
Okay, so where do we even begin? This is a massive story.
Well, he starts with the patriarch, Arthur Sackler, the eldest of the three brothers.
Right.
And he was a marketing genius.
Okay.
He completely revolutionized how drug companies advertise their products.
We see drug ads, all the time these days, but what did he do that was different?
So he really understood the power of targeting doctors directly.
Okay.
We're not talking just like ads in magazines. We're talking articles in prestigious medical journals.
Oh, wow.
Getting endorsements from, leading physicians. And he blurred the lines between marketing and scientific authority.
So it seems almost like it's science, like it's education.
Exactly.
It's pretty clever.
Yeah.
And also kind of unsettling, I think, a little bit when you think about it that way.
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the most striking examples is his work with Valium,
Valium.
which was developed by Roche.
Okay.
But he really saw the potential for this, and he crafted this masterful marketing campaign that made Valium a household name.
Valium, that's the anxiety medication, right?
Exactly.
That's back in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, 50s and 60s. And it's fascinating because you see these early tactics used to market Valium, and it's like an echo decades later with OxyContin.
I'm starting to see the connections here.
Yeah.
But before we get to OxyContin, I want to talk about Arthur for a second.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of person was he?
So Keefe really paints this picture of him as a complex figure.
Okay.
Brilliant businessman,
Sure.
renowned art collector, and a philanthropist.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
Millions to museums and universities, but he had this belief that addiction stemmed from personal weakness,
Oh, interesting.
not the drug itself.
Okay.
And, that was something that was used in the defense of OxyContin later on.
That's actually really chilling, considering what we know about the addictive nature of opioids.
Yes.
So what about his brothers? Did they play a role in all of this?
Oh, absolutely. Mortimer and Raymond, the younger brothers, they were key in building this family's pharmaceutical empire. Okay.
And they had very distinct personalities. Mortimer, he was the more flamboyant one,
Yes.
the socialite.
Okay.
And Raymond was much more kind of business-minded.
So that sounds like a recipe for some, interesting family dynamics.
Oh, there was definitely tension, especially later on.
Right.
But in the earlier days, they worked well together. And in the 1950s, they acquired this small pharmaceutical company.
Oh, yeah.
It's called Purdue Frederick.
Purdue Frederick. Okay.
And it's, insignificant at the time,
Right.
but it lays the foundation for their, future opioid empire.
It's crazy how those small decisions can have such massive consequences.
Totally. And, there were even red flags back then.
Oh, really?
Like this scandal with Henry Welch.
Okay.
He was the head of the FDA's antibiotics division.
Wow.
And he was found to have financial ties to the Sacklers.
Oh, no.
And it raised all these questions about ethics and influence.
So even in those early days,
Yeah.
there were signs of controversy.
That would later kind of really come to define Purdue.
Right.
So how do we go from this small company in the 50s to OxyContin and the whole opioid crisis?
That's where Richard Sackler comes in.
Okay, Richard Sackler.
Raymond's son.
Okay.
He's the driving force behind OxyContin.
So that's where the name that we all know
Yes.
comes into play.
Exactly.
But-
And this is where Keefe's book gets really fascinating.
Okay.
And really disturbing.
Yeah.
Richard was shrewd. He was ambitious.
Right.
He saw this growing focus on pain management
Okay.
and this push to treat pain aggressively.
Right.
And he just seized that opportunity.
So he saw a market and went after it,
Yes.
just like Arthur did with Valium.
Exactly.
But we're talking painkillers here,
Right.
not anxiety medication.
Yes.
What was his strategy?
So he brought in Dr. Russell Portnoy,
Okay.
a leading pain specialist
Right.
who actually championed the use of opioids for chronic pain
Okay.
and downplayed any concern about addiction.
So they were pushing these opioids for long-term use.
Yes.
That seems very risky.
It was incredibly risky.
Yeah.
And as we know now, devastating consequences.
Right.
But Purdue, under Richard's leadership,
Yeah.
they launched this incredibly aggressive marketing campaign that really convinced many doctors that OxyContin was safe and effective for chronic pain.
How did they manage that? Were doctors just not aware of the risks involved?
Well, Purdue was really effective at shaping the narrative around opioids.
Okay.
Their sales reps, they targeted doctors directly.
Yeah.
They downplayed the risk of addiction,
Right.
emphasized the drug's effectiveness,
Good.
and they sponsored all these pain management conferences. They sent doctors on these lavish trips to exotic locations
Wow.
to promote OxyContin.
So they created this whole culture around it,
Yes.
making it seem like a miracle cure.
Exactly. And one of their most successful tactics was promoting this small study called the Porter and Jick study.
Okay.
It suggested that addiction was rare in hospitalized patients who were given opioids.
But if you're in the hospital for a short time, it's a lot different than taking it long term.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
But they used it to their advantage.
Wow.
They had sales reps carry copies of this to show doctors.
It's misleading, but also kind of brilliant
Right.
to try to, really support their claims
Yeah.
about how safe this drug is.
Yeah, they were very good at cherry-picking data
Right.
to support their claims.
So it's aggressive marketing,
Mm-hmm.
downplaying the risks, cherry-picking the data.
Totally.
This seems very deliberate.
It was.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is so disturbing, Keefe reveals these internal memos and emails
Wow.
that show how aware the Sacklers were of the growing addiction problem.
Okay.
Yet they continued to push for even more aggressive sales tactics.
So they knew.
Yes.
It's almost unbelievable how a company can just put profit over people's well-being like that.
It's really disturbing.
Yeah.
It is.
Did anyone push back? Like, were there any warning signs that people saw?
There were definitely warnings,
Okay.
but Purdue was very effective at just deflecting criticism,
Right.
protecting their image.
Okay.
They had teams of lawyers ready to fight anything.
Wow.
And they used their philanthropic efforts, they gave to museums and universities,
Right.
cultural institutions,
Sure.
to build goodwill.
So it's almost like their philanthropy was like a shield
Yes.
to protect themselves from any kind of criticism.
It's one of the key takeaways of the book. They used their wealth and influence to really shape public perception
Okay.
and protect their interests.
This is a lot to process.
It is.
And we haven't even gotten to the full-blown opioid crisis
We haven't.
and the reckoning that followed.
Right, but you see this pattern of behavior
Yeah.
from Arthur and his marketing with Valium to OxyContin.
Right.
It's this ambition, it's this shrewd marketing and this willingness to prioritize profit over the potential risks.
It's not just about one drug or one company.
Yeah.
It's about, these larger forces
Mhm.
at play, the power of corporations.
Totally.
And, all these ethical questions that come up when profit motives clash with public health.
Absolutely.
And it's about understanding how these forces have shaped the crisis that we're facing today.
Exactly.
So stay tuned because we'll be right back with part 2 of our deep dive into Empire of Pain on Ben's book summaries.
Okay.
We'll explore the fallout from Purdue's actions and the impact of the opioid crisis.
All right.
See you then.
Welcome back.
So last time, we kind of left off with Purdue,
Yeah.
poised to release OxyContin.
Yeah, into this market that they had primed with their marketing.
Right. And, obviously the consequences were devastating.
Sour.
You mentioned internal memos
Yeah.
and emails that kind of showed the Sacklers were aware of this growing addiction problem.
Right.
Was there any pushback from within the company at all?
It doesn't seem like it.
Right.
The book really focuses on how, even as these reports of addiction, overdose started trickling in.
Yeah.
Purdue just doubled down. They went after higher dosage prescriptions
Mhm.
because that meant higher profits.
So they saw these warning signs
Yeah.
and just chose to ignore them.
More than ignore.
Really?
They actively fought back.
Wow.
They hired all these lawyers and PR firms to create a counter-narrative.
Okay.
They funded research that downplayed the risks of addiction,
Wow.
And they even went so far as to accuse people who were raising concerns of being anti-pain
Oh, wow.
and that they were trying to deny patients relief.
It's like they weaponized the idea of pain relief
They did.
to protect their product.
Exactly. And it worked for a really long time.
Wow.
They framed this debate in a way that made it very difficult to criticize OxyContin
Right.
without seeming like you were against helping people who were in pain.
This is where I get angry.
Yeah.
You know, it's one thing to be ambitious and to see a market opportunity,
Right.
but to knowingly put people at risk just to make money,
Yeah.
that's just wrong.
It's a whole other level. And Keefe doesn't shy away from that.
Right.
He really documents the human cost
Yeah.
of Purdue's actions, and he weaves in these personal stories.
It's not just about statistics
No, not at all.
and, corporate maneuvers.
Yeah.
It's about real people and families.
Right. Whose lives were shattered.
Right. There was one story that really stuck with me about this woman named Carol.
Oh, yeah.
She lost her son to an OxyContin overdose.
It's heartbreaking.
And he was a young man. He was a promising athlete.
Right, and he gets addicted after a sports injury.
I can't imagine losing a child like that
It's awful.
and knowing it could have been prevented.
And Carol's story is not unique.
Right.
Keefe has many similar stories throughout the book.
And that's what makes it so powerful,
Yes.
because it really brings it to life in a way that statistics never could.
It does, and it's those stories that fueled this eventual backlash
Okay.
against Purdue and the Sacklers.
So as this crisis escalated and the death toll mounted,
Yeah.
people started to wake up to the truth
They did.
about OxyContin.
Yeah, journalists started investigating Purdue's marketing practices,
Right.
and lawsuits started piling up.
So the truth came out.
It did. There was also this growing movement of activists like Nan Golden
Ann Golden, yeah.
and her organization PAIN
Okay.
that were demanding accountability.
I remember reading about her. She was a photographer,
Yes, a renowned photographer.
and she actually battled with OxyContin addiction herself.
She did, and she used her platform to bring this to people's attention.
It's incredible how one person can have such a big impact.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Did it have any impact on the Sacklers themselves?
I think her activism, combined with all the legal pressure and public scrutiny,
Yeah.
really put the Sacklers on the defensive.
Okay.
They started to face consequences for their actions.
So what kind of consequences? Like, did they ever admit they did anything wrong?
Not really. They gave these carefully worded statements expressing sympathy,
Right.
but they maintained that they acted legally and ethically.
Classic non-apology.
Right.
It's just frustrating how people in power just try to evade accountability.
It is, but their actions had a huge impact on millions of lives.
And this legacy is still unfolding.
Oh, absolutely. The opioid crisis hasn't gone away.
Right. It's actually gotten worse.
Yeah, fentanyl and these other synthetic opioids
Right.
have just made it more complex.
So it's not just a story about the past.
No, it's a crisis we're still grappling with.
That has roots in the decisions made by the Sacklers and Purdue.
It does.
What happened to the company, to Purdue?
So they filed for bankruptcy in 2019,
Okay.
facing thousands of lawsuits.
Wow.
And as part of the settlement,
Yeah.
the Sacklers agreed to pay billions of dollars
Okay.
to address the crisis.
Right.
But they were shielded from any personal liability.
So even in bankruptcy, they still managed to protect themselves.
They did. And a lot of people found that really unsettling.
Seems like a slap on the wrist.
Yeah, given the damage that was caused.
It's unbelievable that they could walk away with their fortunes intact.
It's frustrating, but the settlement did provide some resources
Okay.
to help address the crisis.
It's a small victory in a much larger fight.
It is. We need systemic change
Right.
to address this, to prevent something like this from happening again.
So this fight requires us to hold these companies accountable
Absolutely.
and to regulate this industry better.
Yes, and to provide better access to treatment
Right.
and support for people who are struggling with addiction.
Empire of Pain is a powerful reminder
It is.
of what's at stake, and it's a call to action.
It is, yeah.
So what can our listeners do? Where do we even begin to address this?
I think there's so many ways to get involved.
Okay.
Support organizations
Yeah.
that are working to combat this.
Right.
Advocate for policy change.
Sure.
Educate yourself and others
Right.
about the dangers. And
Yeah.
most importantly,
Yeah.
listen to and support
Okay.
those who have been affected.
So it's about individual action,
Yeah.
but it's also about systemic change.
It's a multifaceted problem.
Right.
We need a multifaceted approach.
We need to address the root causes,
Yeah.
provide treatment and support,
Uh-huh.
and hold those responsible accountable for their actions.
Yeah,
Empire of Pain is a really powerful and disturbing book,
it is.
but it's necessary.
It's a story that needed to be told.
And Keefe tells it with such clarity and compassion
He does.
and honesty.
Yes.
I hope that people will be inspired to learn more and to get involved.
I do too.
This has been a really challenging but important conversation.
It has been, yes.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Ben's Book Summaries.
Yes, thank you.
We hope this deep dive was informative and thought-provoking.
I hope so.
Until next time, keep reading
Keep learning.
and keep those minds engaged. Okay, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into Empire of Pain.
Yeah.
It's been a tough conversation.
It-
But I think it's really important to kind of end on a note of hope.
I agree.
So what happens after the bankruptcy?
Yeah.
After the settlement? Does the story just end there?
It doesn't.
Okay.
And that's something I appreciate about Keefe's work.
Right.
He doesn't just leave us with despair.
Right.
He highlights these efforts
Yeah.
of people who are fighting back, who are demanding accountability, who are working towards solutions.
So there is a sense of agency,
Oh, absolutely.
people actually taking action.
Yes.
Okay. So what are some of these actions being taken? Are
Yeah.
we talking, legal battles,
Yeah.
policy changes?
It's all of the above.
Okay.
There are still legal efforts to hold the Sacklers accountable,
Okay.
to ensure that those settlement funds are actually used effectively,
Right.
and to prevent, similar situations from happening in the future.
So there is a push for justice,
Yeah.
for some sense of reckoning.
There is.
And it's not just about punishing the Sacklers.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's about addressing, the root of the problem.
Exactly.
So what are some of those systemic issues?
Right.
We've touched on the influence of the pharmaceutical companies,
Yeah.
but what else is at play?
I mean, Keefe, he digs into the role of the regulatory agencies,
Right.
the way that pain management was taught in medical schools,
Wow.
even the cultural factors that contributed to overprescribing.
It's multi-layered.
It is.
Like-
It's really complex.
Very complex.
That's why these conversations are so important.
Yeah.
And raising awareness and pushing for change at all levels.
One of the things that really struck me about the book
Yeah.
is how he connects the dots between all these seemingly disparate events.
What do you mean?
Well, how he ties Arthur Sackler's marketing tactics
Right.
back in the 50s and 60s
Yeah.
to the strategies used to promote OxyContin.
Yeah.
It just shows how these patterns of behavior
Yeah.
can persist over time.
That's a really crucial point.
Yeah.
This book isn't just like a history.
Right.
It's like this cautionary tale.
It is, yeah.
It shows how small decisions
Yeah.
can have huge consequences.
Right.
And how corporate greed can be masked by philanthropy
Right.
and marketing.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It does.
Are there other empires of pain out there?
Right.
Other industries, individuals who were prioritizing profit over people?
Absolutely. It challenges us to think more critically.
Right.
To question these narratives we're being told.
Yeah.
To hold those in power accountable.
It's a lot, but it's also empowering.
It is.
It shows that we have the power
We do.
to make a difference
Yeah.
and to demand better.
We can demand better
Absolutely.
from our institutions and each other.
So what can our listeners do?
Yeah.
Where do we begin to address this problem?
I think there's so many ways to get involved.
Right.
Support organizations working to combat this.
Right.
Advocate for policy change. Educate yourself and others about
Yeah.
the dangers of
That-
addiction.
Okay.
And, listen to and support those who have been affected by this.
So it's really about individual action,
Yeah.
but it's also about systemic change as well.
Yeah.
Like you said, multifaceted.
We need a multifaceted approach.
Absolutely. We need to address the root causes,
Yeah.
provide that treatment and support, and hold those responsible accountable for their actions.
Yeah, I think Empire of Pain
Yeah.
is such a powerful and disturbing book,
It is.
but it's necessary.
It is.
It's a story that needed to be told.
Absolutely. And Keefe tells it with such clarity and compassion.
He does.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I really hope that people will be inspired to learn more,
You too.
to get involved, to be a part of the solution.
Yeah,
This has been a really challenging
it has.
but incredibly important conversation.
I agree.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Ben's Book Summaries.
Thank you.
We hope this deep dive into Empire of Pain was informative and thought-provoking.
I hope so.
Until next time, keep reading, keep learning, and keep those minds engaged.